your mom and your dad.
Totally
I've
polar
heard multiple
opposites.
interviews that you did.
Yeah.
Polar opposites in
Yeah.
what they did, and like you were mixed, like in that upbringing. Like you
Yeah.
had, it's like the halo and the devil. I don't want to say that,
Yeah,
but
no, you're
it's
right.
like
Yeah.
basically what it was.
You can totally say that. It's accurate.
Man, so what was that experience like? Kind of go in a little bit of detail of what both your father and your mother did. Your father was the VP of Polaroid, right?
Correct.
Which is, if you haven't heard of Polaroid, you're living under a rock,
Right.
right?
Yeah. This was way back in the day, back in the 80s. And, for my dad was just a very street smart individual, very street smart, and had a lot of business acumen about him.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, his demons were his ultimate demise. And so, mom put up with that for over 2 decades, tried to understand, his downfalls because of the individual that she loved, but unfortunately, it was just too much. And so ultimately, his demise was drugs.
Yeah.
And so they parted their ways, and thankfully, having grown up in that environment, very drug addicted father, notorious gang member, just a very, very, very deep water type of situation, right? You're kind of constantly treading deep waters. It's exhausting.
Yeah.
And when you do that, what you pull out of it is one of two things. You either end up on Jerry Springer.
Right.
Right?
Would have been a perfect story.
Perfect story. I have every reason to be on Jerry Springer, But for me, what I extracted out of it was what not to do. And so that, to me, is what I pulled out of my childhood. I pulled out of my childhood what it was like to be a father not there.
Yeah.
So I reversed engineered, how do I be present? Those are the types of things that I pulled from my childhood. And for that, I'm grateful, to be totally honest. Super grateful for all of it. All of it.
It's like that one, I'll relate to this and some of the younger guys, like a meme on social media where it's like, your father was an alcoholic, one son grew up to be an alcoholic, the other
Yes.
grew up to be a successful businessman. Like,
Yeah.
you go one of two roads, right?
You really do.
And it's your choice.
Yeah. It is your choice. It's your choice. So it's interesting you said that. I talk a lot about choice. I talk a lot about belief systems and habits. And so every day, when you tell yourself this narrative, I heard it a lot when I was locked up. I hear it a lot today when I talk to incarcerated individuals. Then they'll tell you, I would either be dead or in prison. I had two options in life, right? But that's only because that's a narrative that fits your current state.
Right.
So there's plenty of guys who came from the hood. There's plenty of guys with my background. There's plenty of guys who took the alternative path and have made it. That should fit your narrative. So when you start telling yourself that belief system, when you start surrounding yourself with a better network, you can elevate yourself past what you told yourself you were worthy of.
Honestly, like you alone growing up with the experiences that you had the skill set. Like you
Yes.
had the experiences, whether you want to look at them as being good or bad experiences.
100%.
All you got to do is kind of like flip that coin a little bit, and I
Yeah.
feel like you're in the right. And we
Yeah.
see it with so many, ex-convicts who were rightfully convict. Like we were talking
Yeah.
a little bit before. Like it's kind of strange when you first got locked up for what
Yes.
happened, and everybody that you've talked to, the executives in there, were like, I've never seen anything like this before.
Yeah, it's a lot of bizarre paperwork. It's a very confusing time. It was a first charge that was non-dangerous, non-violent. So that confuses people as to why you would face prison time. I had several letters of recommendation, two most notably from the federal government.
Yeah.
And those are confusing things. Why would the state continue to go down this rabbit hole? But when I tried to figure that out, you get all sorts of kind of crazy, obtuse answers. They'll say, oh, well, you're already in the blender. Your name's already been thrown in. You're already indicted. So you kind of get these things. But for me, I knew for a fact, I'm telling you what, like, when I fought this, my original charge came from '06,
Right.
and I was incarcerated in 2012. So this is 6 years of life that happened while we were going through family, business, marriage. All of these things still exist while you've got one foot on this side of the fence and then you're fighting the government on that side. So there's this point, and it's very hard to explain to people unless you've really, really been through like a harrowing situation. I knew one night when my wife and I were sitting in the living room, I knew that what was coming next couldn't be as bad or worse than what we had seen the last 6 years. That was the moment we had to decide. And we let it up to the judge to decide.
Really?
We did, yeah. We couldn't come to, my first plea agreement was 66 years.
Really?
Swear to you. Yeah, when you look at that paper, you're talking about a life sentence, effectively. And I don't want to diminish, based on the work I do now, I don't want to diminish the individuals who do have a life sentence. But for me, I wasn't in the prison system. I didn't grow up a troubled teenager. We all screwed around. We all did things that you shouldn't do as boys. But I wasn't in, robbing liquor stores and knocking over Circle Ks. It just wasn't my trajectory in life. I kind of did all the quote unquote right things. Went to school, took care of your family, was involved in church, Boy Scouts, all those quote unquote check boxes of like rightness.
Right.
And so I wasn't down this trajectory that I see now a lot. I deal with a lot of troubled youth now. They start at 12 because mom and dad were not in the picture, and then they do some things that are just crazy at 13, 14, and they end up in the system at 17 and 18, with 30, 40, 50-year sentences if they're lucky. That wasn't my trajectory. And so when I was looking at this on paper, that 66 years for me was a life sentence. And I couldn't make heads or tails of it, Jack. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. It didn't make sense. Everybody I sat down with thought that one thought was it was politically motivated based on who my dad was. One thought was that it was politically motivated based on my age and the dollar amount. And I had all sorts of stories that would fit that narrative. And I could have became the victim. I was in the elevator one time, and we were going back and forth. Every month, every 3 months, you go into court. And I was in the elevator. I was with my attorney. I get into the elevator, and one of the state's attorneys is there in the elevator with us. And about my age at the time. And he looked me up, looked me down, looked at my shoes, and went, "Saw your Jaguar that you pulled up in. Nice car." And that moment for me was humbling. That moment for me was a reality check. It was a gut check that this was real. I was in the blender. And all those kind of materialistic or egotistical things that we often subscribe to, even more so now, based on social media.
Right.
Right? Those things became so irrelevant so fast. So fast. A lot of perspective was gained.
How early on did you figure out, because you learned finance at a young age.
Young, my friend. I loved it. I loved numbers. I still do. When I was little, 8, 9, 10 years old, I did all the things that you normally do. Growing up back east, we had the snow cone stand, we had the donut stand, you had the cookie stand, had all of these fun things around the neighborhood. It was just my natural hustle. And so then as I would start to get older, I really worked into like sales. And so I was 12 years old, really trying to figure out my FICO score. I would ride around with my mom and my dad, and I'd be like looking at businesses. And you drive around and go, okay, this is when I really realized. I remember this at 12 years old, understanding who owned Circle K. Was it a franchise? Was it a franchisee? Was it a franchisor? Who's the parent company? How do I get involved in these? How much money? And I remember soliciting franchise offering agreements, now that I know what they're called. But I would literally solicit them and go, how much money do I need to buy this? How do I get a gas station? And these were things that just came naturally to me. I loved it, and I still do. And so the numbers aspect to me, I just was gravitate towards.
Really?
Loved it, still do. Even with simple things, like even with your name, I would always alphabetize things as I would drive. So I would do like A, C, K, J. And I would alphabetize it like 1 through 26. A is 1, C is 3, J is 10, K is 11, like from an alphabetical perspective. And so then 1 and 3 is 4, and 10, and then it's 14, 11, so that's 25. So I would just be like, all right, Jack's 25. And I would do like this as I'm driving down the street. It was just something that would come natural to me.
Oh
and so
God.
when I learned that I could translate that into like real numbers, real stocks, real companies, and understand certain buzzwords, balance sheets, profit and loss, revenue and expenses. Like these are all fancy words that everybody uses, but at the end of the day, businesses do two things. They can sell more, they can spend less. That's how you make it.
Was your father an influence at all when it came to making money? Because obviously he was very good at it.
Very
for
good
better
at
or for
it.
worse.
For both, yeah. For both,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, Pops was very good at making money. Very good at making money. In the early 80s, when he was around with us, he was doing 6 figures a week. Most 90% of it under the table and illegally. But yeah, he was very good at it and always had an idea, always had an invention. And so again, that's where I thought, okay, if I've got what I consider the best of both worlds, a dad who was very street smart, who was very savvy, very business minded and intelligent, and a mom that wanted to make sure that we took the right way.
Right.
And that's where I thought, okay, how do I really reverse engineer this? And I took this time in prison to figure out what's next. And I knew then, and I know now, if I have enough time, I could figure anything out. Time to me is that little capsule that I just can't get enough of. I can't get more of. It's the endless commodity, right? It's all these other things, phrases, buzzwords, analogies
Right.
that we use. And I thought, if I'm going to be a great father, then I need enough time. If I'm going to be a great entrepreneur, then I need enough time. And that's typically what it is time. Your business is a prime example. If you guys put enough time into this and enough time in the seats, it's going to work, right? And as it goes along, it's going to change, it's going to morph, it's going to adapt different
Right.
philosophies, but it's going to win. And if you give it enough time and you nurture it, then you can figure it out.
Right. If you're truly passionate about it, you'll figure out a way to move forward and make a ton of
100%.
progress.
100%.
Whether you're taking one step at a time or 100 steps a day, you know?
You're totally right. And I think, especially for the audience and the demographic, the people who look up to you, the overnight success is about 30,000 overnights, right?
Give or take.
Right. That is something, and I use that as an analogy. It's
Right.
not 30,000 nights, but
It's 60,000
it's
nights
60,000.
for anybody listening.
Exactly. But there's a lot of people out there, and we subscribe to it in our society. Social media has told us that you can get rich from your mom's basement in about 21 days
Yep.
with like six-pack abs and $1 million, 3 filters on your face, and all of a sudden all of these things stack what we believe is true reality, and it's not. The hustle and the grind and the 4-letter word of work really is the recipe for success.
So when you're, to go back to, your childhood, because like you said it in multiple interviews that you were the cleanest kid on the block, but at
Yeah.
the same time we're kind of mixed in, driving these guys as Jaguars around to the clubs, going to all these
Totally.
different places. You growing up in a household with your father who, again, VP of Polaroid, like that in and of itself should have been enough.
Should have been.
Would you say that?
Should
And
have
then your
been.
mom on the other side, she converted to Mormonism.
Correct, yeah.
And then you grew up in the church. You were
Correct.
part of the ministry and everything.
The whole nine, yeah.
So completely black and white.
Completely black and white. And so it was very confusing, and I say this a lot. Like, it was so hard for me. And keep in mind, like, growing up until I was about 10 years old, life was good.
Yeah.
And then Dad really got involved, in some very harrowing things.
Was that a secret to you guys at the time?
At the time, it was.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%. Now that we look back, you're able to kind of draw on conclusions, or certain patterns of behavior where we go, oh no, this should have been a telltale sign that something was up.
Right.
But yeah, at the time it was very much a secret. You grow up a certain way. You don't think anything is unusual. And that's where, now that you look back on 30 years, you're able to say, okay, this was a red flag, or I should have known better, or this was obvious. But when you're growing up in your household, typically, you just want everything to be right. You go to school, you play some sports, you hang out in the neighborhood, you eat dinner at a certain time, you kind of go to bed. That's what kids do. But for me, I remember there was a very specific point where I wanted love from my dad, but I also wanted him to never come back to the house. That's a very tough position for a young kid to be in. And I take those experiences, my dad would be the first to advocate for his family. He'd be the first to come out of the stands at a Pop Warner game and just light up the side. I mean, he'd beat every coach up who ever said a 4-letter word to us. Psychotic. But at the same time, he couldn't channel that the right way. He didn't care enough about his family to put aside his own demons, which destroyed his family. And so those are some things that I'm able to resonate with in the youth and even in the adults that I talk to that are incarcerated or not in today's world. There's a lot of childhood trauma that we don't address. Most kids that are involved in the justice system have some point or they can point back to, and they can say, I was 6 years old, I was 9 years old, whatever age they were, where they can definitively say that their family went left or they made a decision that got them here. And I can say that as well. Like I can definitively remember the night where I thought, I hope this guy never comes back. But as an 8-year-old and as a 10-year-old boy, you just really want love from your parents.
Right.
That's what you want.
And you think as a parent, obviously you had the time to think all of this over before you even had kids.
You're right.
But now you know that I got all of that shit out of the way and I
Yeah.
can focus my attention 100 and solely on them when I have to, when they're
Correct.
present, right? Where back in the day, like your parents, if they wanted to talk through their feelings, it was almost frowned upon,
Oh,
right? Especially in
totally.
Boston, Massachusetts. Are you
Totally
kidding me?
frowned upon.
So I'm from Jersey, growing
Uh-huh.
up in just the early 2000s.
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
afraid
yeah.
to talk about that stuff,
Totally.
right?
Yeah.
So it was almost as if like maybe he just didn't get the opportunity because your grandfather, his father, just wouldn't be allowed.
You are
and
totally
then he
right.
takes those insecurities and maybe didn't hurt you specifically, but in the long run of the decisions that he made, hurt his
Correct.
family in the long run.
1000%. Bro, you've nailed so much in that paragraph. I get so excited that you said it. Yes. Number one, I think that masculinity's become like a four-letter word, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're a hunter and you're a gatherer and you kill what you eat, like you should be proud of that. You should be proud that you take care of your family. And there's a certain position in society that comes with that. I take care of my family, you know, my wife doesn't have to work. Like there's a bravado about that, right? And there should be, in my opinion. What the alternative to that is the conversations that are not happening at the dinner tables of America. That's what you just pointed on. The
Yeah.
insecurities. Bro, I unpack this stuff all the time with guys, with males who should be role models, who have a good 5 and 6 and 7-figure job, who have a good wife who still wants to sleep with them, who have kids that are good, and they're miserable. They're absolutely miserable. They wake up day in and day out, hate the job, kick the dog, you know, whatever it might be. And it's their insecurities that are fueling all of these negative emotions. That to me, bro, what you just said is so impactful. And so here's what happens. When a dad or a father figure or a husband or a provider, whatever you want to call it, is not comfortable with his financial security in life, he's afraid to have those conversations with his children. If he's not comfortable taking his shirt off at the pool, he's afraid to push his children into physical exercise. Follow? He's not a role model himself. So by default, we're not having very difficult conversations around dinner tables of America. And to me, that's where the family unit has started to really dissipate. Sadly, in my opinion.
Not a lot of people are leading by example.
You are absolutely
I grew up
right.
with, there was a ton of just